now we're gonna go through how to do it. And what I thought would be very helpful is to go very briefly through the financial statement and just point out where people miss it. And now let's just quickly talk about why people miss it. And it's very, very human. So many people, hopefully they have long marriages. Nobody gets married to separate. So hopefully you have a long marriage. And unfortunately, if you separate and have to go through this calculation, we're going to have to look backwards many, many years ago.
Yeah.
Your net worth was, on the one hand, or it's very difficult to prove it because let's say you had a lot of money in the bank. So how are you going to prove that if you don't have bank statements, and maybe the bank doesn't have the bank statements?
Wow.
That's a problem. There's another issue that people have about remembering date of marriage, and that is if they lived together before they got married, the date of marriage may actually not be a very special day to them.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's just in the mix of their entire relationship. So
That's right.
that, sometimes I have to peg it to a world event. Okay, can you remember back, when this person was a mayor, or this, like dare I say, like 9/11, like some kind of world. Where were you at that time? What was your net worth at that time?
Oh God.
Oh yeah, very not easy, right?
Yeah.
So so it's very human to not get this right, and then the form itself is confusing as it is.
Right.
Okay, so let's just go through the form, and that's what we're going to do for the balance of this, and then we'll come back for some takeaways.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so you have the form here. Okay, so again, when you separate, you know where you're living and what you own, what land you own.
Yeah.
Okay, so how would you know and how would you prove the land that you have years ago? Okay, so you're looking for basically a deed or a transfer document.
Yeah.
And luckily in Ontario, we have a registry system, like most jurisdictions, and so you can go either to a real estate lawyer's office or to the land registry office or online. Okay, and I'll say the address. It's onland.on.ca. I believe that's the address. Onland, ONLAND. And for about $40, including tax, you can pull up your property abstracts.
Oh.
And for about $4 per instrument, you can pull up the transfer. Okay, we'll come back to this as well for the mortgage, because you have to show what your mortgage is, right? Okay. When we're talking about land, I should talk about matrimonial home. Okay, and this unfortunately is very confusing for everybody, including lawyers. So people get this mixed up all the time. Okay, I'm just looking to see whether if you look at the instructions don't talk about the matrimonial home issue. That's fine. Okay, let's just talk about matrimonial home.
Yes.
While we're here.
Yes.
And I typed up over here that you owned on the date of separation a matrimonial home, and you owned 100% of it.
Right.
And I named 1 Main Street.
Yeah.
And that's important, the address.
Now
for any asset, you will see you would put the valuation date value.
Yes.
And as part of our discussion, we're talking about date of separation, you would put, date of marriage, we would be putting the date of marriage value.
Yeah.
Over here, and that's going to help you lessen your net family property, because now in dollars that you're sharing only 1 million minus 500,000.
Perfect.
So now you're sharing only half.
Right.
We looked earlier at the law, and there was this exception about marital home.
Right.
Okay? And why is there an exception? And the short answer is there might be some policy reason back in the 80s or even earlier than that, because the fact had a number of amendments leading up to Family Law Act, 1990. And it might be that for policy reasons, we want to share, we want people to share like the entire house. And so we don't want to get of this data reduction. But
Right.
that's what the exception is. The exception is that if you owned one Main Street
Yeah.
on date of marriage,
Mhm.
and then you also owned one Main Street on valuation date,
Yeah.
you obviously have to include the valuation date value, but
Yeah.
you big X over here, we do not include the value.
Ah,
Okay, this is
okay.
very confusing.
Ah,
Okay, now let me tell you something.
okay.
If one Main Street
Yeah.
was an investment, a rental,
Yeah.
we wouldn't be having this discussion at all. You would just put $500,000.
I see.
Do you get it?
Got it. Got
It's
it. Got
only
it.
because it's a matrimonial home, but wait, it gets a little more confusing, right? Okay, so
Okay.
we're back here.
Yeah.
What if you owned one Main Street when you got married?
Yeah.
Two Main. In other words, the marriage, and now you put all that money into two Main Street, right? So two Main Street did not exist when you got married.
Right.
And let's say two Main Street is the matrimonial home. Okay.
Ooh. Oh,
Okay, let's do that. Are you
yeah.
with me?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Well, guess what? In this scenario, one Main Street, it is not a matrimonial home. It's just a former house. Okay, and the reason for that is that Section 18 of the Family Law Act defines what a matrimonial home is, and it's the property that you're living in at the date of separation.
Oh my goodness.
That's right. And so even though it's the exact same equity as scenario number one, where
Yeah.
you only owned one Main Street, because one Main Street was sold, you now are able to deduct the value that existed when you got married on date of marriage.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yes. Interesting.
Now
Wow.
let me tell you something similar
Mhm.
without two Main Street. Just to make this is let's call this scenario 3.
Okay.
Scenario 3, and I'm just deleting this so that it's
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah.
Scenario 3 is where you own one Main Street,
Right.
okay? And then you move out of it and you're renting, but you keep one Main Street and now it's a rental.
Yeah.
Do you understand? It used to be a matrimonial home. You were living in it.
Mm-hmm.
It still exists, but it's no longer your matrimonial home because the definition of a matrimonial home is the place where you were residing at the date of valuation date
Right.
as your primary residence. And
Right.
so if you're not living there, you're renting it out, then you also get the benefit of the date of marriage.
Wow. I see.
Okay, so
Okay.
it's very tied. So
Oh
the
my
takeaway
God.
is
Okay.
start at the date of separation. What is the matrimonial home at the date of
Ah.
separation? That is the starting point of the conversation. If it's the same address as a property that you owned on the date of marriage, then unfortunately you are not getting the
Right.
benefit
You're
of its
not.
equity. Now it's
Yes.
back to matrimonial home.
Yeah.
If it
That's
was
okay.
sold
Mm-hmm.
or you moved out, then it can lose that status and then the 500,000 comes back.
Huh. Oh my
Okay.
goodness. Okay.
Let me tell you where people get very confused about this. And that is they say, well, wait a second, let's go back to that one Main Street, two Main Street,
Scenario.
right?
Yeah.
I had one Main Street, I
Yeah.
sold it,
Mm-hmm.
it went into two Main Street, and I can trace the money can be traced into 2 Main Street, and therefore it should not get the exclusion.
Yeah.
Okay, and whoever's watching this video, if you watch the videos regarding excluded property, right,
Mhm.
and about inheritances and all that, that's where the word tracing comes up, and people import a concept that has nothing to do with what we're talking about to this conversation.
Oh my
There
goodness.
is no tracing. It's either you own this property at date of marriage or you did not. It's a yes or no question. And then there's a light switch. Either it's a matrimonial home or it's not at
Mm.
the date of separation. So
Wow.
if you if you know if it's the same property at date of separation as it is on date of marriage and it's a matrimonial home, you're not going to get the benefit of the value for date of marriage. That's the easiest way to say this. Okay, and one Main Street is the best way to say it also. If one Main Street exists on date of separation and it also exists on date of marriage,
Yeah.
you're not getting the benefit of date of marriage
Right.
value.
Right.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's just the law. It's very complicated. It's very confusing. It's not so complicated once you understand it, but it's confusing. And people then import this tracing concept. Oh, well, I can trace the proceeds of one means. No, 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 no. It doesn't exist. That's
I have a
completely
quick question. So with
sure.
the, you mentioned that there's a lawyer's form that a form that lawyers use. Does that help lawyers to avoid this confusion? That lawyer's form. Was it divorce mate? I don't know what you're talking.
Oh, the lawyer's form. So that's a
Yeah.
very good question. And the answer is that there are two versions of it.
Oh,
In other words, there is professional software that you can use,
yeah.
and the cloud version does have a switch where you can say whether this is a matrimonial home or not.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay. Now, if you put it in and then it right, you're not doing anything quote unquote wrong, but the result is not correct, and
Yeah.
therefore you're going to need to um, you got to be careful about relying on something. You want to check to make sure that your calculations are correct.
Mm,
The information may not be wrong because it did exist on date of marriage,
right.
but because of the law of this exception,
Yeah.
it won't be calculated, and so your calculations will be wrong.
Okay.
Okay, so that's land. That
Okay.
is the
Yep.
most confusing part of
Okay.
this. And now we're just going to keep going and just try to understand how to um, evidence this. Okay. Now,
Hmm.
when we talk about evidence, this is actually kind of important.
Oh,
Just like with exclusions,
yeah.
because you're deducting away from your valuation date numbers,
Yeah.
the legal onus is on you. Either you can prove it or you can't. Okay. Now, not everything needs a piece of paper. This is if you don't have any paper, you may still have a credible story. Okay.
Oh.
And so let's just quickly talk about credibility and stories
Hmm.
because we're just going to go through the form here. Just remember, and this goes back to an earlier video that we talked about,
Hmm.
where on this form, there's a question of ownership and there's a question of value. And those are two separate questions. So let's just go to the next item here. Okay.